I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us today, a brand new guest. It's somebody that I bet you I've had at least 20 different requests from people over the last few years to get this guy on. We're talking about G. Edward Griffin. He's done so many things in his career. He's done a bunch of geopolitical work. Of course, he's the writer of the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, all about the Federal Reserve. Also, he's even done things on cancer. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to talk about, everybody loves your book. I don't know how many copies you sold. I bet you a ton of them, The Creature from Jekyll Island. So I want to talk to you about monetary policy and endgame theory and where we are in the arc here. Where do you think we are in the arena of printed Federal Reserve notes that are sloshing around all over the globe?
Well, Greg, you didn't know it, but that was probably a bad question to ask me. And the reason I say that is because I have, fortunately, I've been very right on my predictions, but I've been very bad about timing. I remember when I first became aware of the real problems that are going on in the world way back in the 1960s, and I thought by the end of the 1960s that we were in the end game. Well, we were in the end game, of course, but we were in the early end game, and I guess that's probably still the correct way for me to answer the question. I don't really know. The question usually is phrased in how much time do we have left before everything falls apart, and I don't really know the answer to that. It's amazing to me how resilient the economy has been, and we've had a lot of flywheel action from a very healthy economy a couple of decades ago, and so it's amazing to me that they can keep the bubble patched and keep it from bursting. But to tell you what really is on my mind is I don't see how the international structure can be held together with the great cycles that are going on and the great convulsions that are going on in the economy. I just don't see how it can go on more than a couple of more years at the most. But with the caveat that I've been wrong before on timing. But I think the more important question is we know what's coming. I remember years ago I was talking to some people in Montana, I believe it was. They were ranchers up there that had these big ranches, and the question came up in casual conversation is, something like this. Well, Seth, what do you think? We're going to get a big freeze this year? And the answer was, well, I don't know whether it's this year or the next year or the next year. We get them on an average of about every 9 years. We don't know when they're coming, but we know they're coming, and so we prepare. I think that's really the bottom line. We know it's coming. We don't know the exact time, but it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And once people understand that, then the other question that usually follows makes more sense. Well, what can we do about it to protect ourselves and perhaps to protect the system that we're in? Be aware it's coming. I don't know how soon, but I think it's probably sooner than most people would like to think.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that, and I just, I know you've studied this and you at least saw this. Some big turns. Erskine Bowles, they had the Democrat and the Republican get together and, we need to cut $4 trillion in 10 years. That's gone. Poof. We had the sequestration, $85 billion in cuts. The Republicans don't want to make cuts. The Democrats, the Republicans don't want to raise taxes. Democrats don't want to make cuts. That is gone. That's off the table. So you think about it, a few of the candidates talk about the deficit, which I think is, lip speak. Just lip service. They're not doing anything. There are no stories about reducing the debt. There are no plans to reduce the debt. So obviously, if there's no plan to reduce the debt, aren't they just going to just run it and gun it until it blows? Isn't that really the plan?
That's obviously the plan, Greg, and it has been the plan for quite some time. You used the magic phrase, lip service. These fellows in Washington and these gals in Washington are very good at that. I get perhaps a little more angry on this issue than I should because we know what politics is all about. But I really get so tired of this lip service, these people posturing as we got to do something about this and vote for me because I believe in the Constitution. I believe in America. I believe in fiscal responsibility. Well, they may believe in it, but they don't try to do anything about it. And I have to say, in all fairness, if I were in Congress or in the Senate today, I would be pretty helpless to do anything about it as one individual. There's nothing that can be done about it. This thing is a runaway machine, and I would feel much better if these political figures would just say, hey, this is out of our control right now. We need a substantial change in the system. It isn't something that we can just pass a law, and maybe this little law that we just passed, it will hold up because the whole machine is against it. We need more honesty. People have to stand up and say, we're in for a tough time. There's no easy way out of this. Hang on to your seatbelts. We're coming into the rapids now. We need that kind of thinking, I believe, and that kind of honesty. But we're not, because most of these guys and gals in Washington are just thinking, well, it's going to be bad, but at least I'm in a good spot, and they're more worried about themselves and their families than they are about the nation.
Forget about the timing. How bad, when you say it's going to get bad, we're going into the rapids and all that, describe what it's going to look like to the average American, most of the, the rest of the 99% out there. What's it going to look like when it fully hits?
Well, the main mechanism that people will feel most directly will be the loss of value of purchasing power for their currency. The dollar will buy less and less and less, as it has been doing, but it's been sort of gradual, and it's been, we get used to it. And there's a lot of misinformation, too. We're told that inflation is 3.5%, 4%, something like that, when in reality, in my view, it's more like 8, 9, 12%. When you look at the really important indexes, not the one that they quote, they take all the stuff out of it that doesn't look good, like the cost of education and the cost of groceries and things like that, and say, well, television sets are coming down in price, so therefore that's what they tend to put into the index. But when you look at the real cost of living, inflation is really pretty high now, but we haven't seen anything yet compared to what it will be when finally the rest of the world does what it's now saying it's going to do, which is they're going to stop accepting Uncle Sam's dollars. They're going to stop using the Federal Reserve note as the international reserve currency. And when they stop that, well, then we have no place to get rid of all of these extra dollars we make up in the digital printing press. And many of those billions and trillions of euro dollars, they call them, which is all over the world, really, not just in Europe, but means all of the money that we have created out of nothing through the Federal Reserve, and we've sent it overseas. The people around the world have been willing to accept those dollars because they use them as their international currency. When that stops, all those trillions and trillions of euro dollars that we have put overseas will come back to us because the people that hold them, like China, for example, say, well, we can't use all of these, and they'll come back and they'll use them to buy up anything they can here. They'll buy up anything for sale. They'll buy our products, that part will sound good. We got a market for our products. No matter how expensive they are, people will buy them because they're trying to get rid of their dollars. But they'll also come back and they'll buy up our real estate and our stocks and bonds and our businesses, which we see happening now. They'll buy up our politicians or anything else that's for sale to get rid of those dollars as quickly as possible. And when that happens, all of these dollars will be flooding through our economy, and the price of bread, I won't even put a price on it, but it doesn't make any difference. You could say $100 for a price for a loaf of bread, and it probably would be. That's the kind of thing we're going to see, maybe even worse, just like we saw in Zimbabwe and in Germany at the end of the Weimar Republic. These things happen in history. They've happened before, and the United States is not exempt from those laws of economics. It's going to happen here if there's no substantial change in policy. Right now, we don't see anything on the horizon indicating that there will be a substantial change in policy. So, as a working hypothesis, you can say it will happen here. And back to your question, the main form of it will be the loss of purchasing power, hyperinflation, which means really the destruction of an effective working economy. Employment will be rampant. People will unfortunately turn to the government, which caused the problem. They'll turn to the government for the solution. They'll say, Mr. Congressman, Mr. Senator, Mr. President, won't you please save us? Won't you please, you who created this mess, won't you please be the good guys now and save us? And they'll be very happy that they've already got a plan on the table for that. they'll say this is how they're saving us. And that is, they'll simply say, well, this currency is no longer any good. It served its purpose. Now we have a new currency. And so they'll go to something that will be perhaps a regional currency, and they may call it the Amero, for example, for the North American Union. And we will have a monetary system very much like the euro for Europe, for the European Union. That's all in the works. It's in the wings, and they're hoping that they can pass that off on us as a solution to the problem. The Amero, if it comes into existence, will be no different than the Federal Reserve note, except it will be issued by three governments, the United States, Mexico, and Canada all together. And then the final end game, as you called it correctly, is that there will be an international currency. They'll say, well, this didn't work, the Amero didn't work, the Euro's not working, all of these international regional currencies aren't working. So now it's time for the true one world international currency. Don't know what that will be called, but it might be called the Bancor. This seems to be the word they like to use. And so that will be our salvation, we'll be thinking, and we'll be told anyway. And it'll be the same as all the others, all fiat money, not based on anything except incredible debt. Purchasing power will be lost on that one as well. But the difference is, once we get to the international currency, there'll be no place else to go. We'll be stuck with a worthless one world currency. You can't change currencies. You can't go to the yen. You can't go to the Deutschmark. You can't move around to see, well, maybe this will be a better currency to put my savings into. You'll be stuck with it. And finally, when that fails and people are really in desperate straits, what always happens in that scenario, Greg, as you know, I'm sure, is that people turn to the government and they ask for the government to do the very worst thing possible, and that is to take over and control everything. It'll be a command economy. The prices of everything will be determined by the government, like they now are in Venezuela. And the results in the United States and every place else that's using this world currency will be the result of a command economy, as in Venezuela. We've seen it. People are lined up in the stores around the block to get simple food for the day. It's rationing, price controls. Stores are closing down. They're being taken over by the government. Everything ends up, at the end of that scenario, being run by the government. And when I say everything, that includes you and me. That's where this is headed if we don't turn it around.
What happens to things like precious metals, gold and silver and things like that when this hits?
Well, probably in the early stages of this, those who are holding precious metals will do very well, because it'll be the one thing of intrinsic value. But if we allow this thing to go to full term and we have a totalitarian system, or a series of totalitarian systems in various regions, people with gold or silver will be shot, because they'll be claimed to be enemies of the state. They'll be traitors. They'll be hoarders. They'll be the ones that the government will say caused all of this, and so forth. So I'm a big gold fan, by the way, and I put as much of my savings as I can into gold and silver. I believe that it is a storehouse of wealth, and it is a very sound thing to do in a sane economy and in a free world. But what I'm saying is, it's not just economics that we're talking about. We're talking about politics and social order, and we're talking about a complete totalitarian world, possibly, that we're moving into. And under those conditions, there's no such thing as an economy anymore. You don't buy or sell based on money. You have units issued by the totalitarian state, and the number of units of purchasing power that you are allocated depends entirely on your rank in the system, how useful you are to the grand leader at the top, whether or not you make waves. If you make waves and resist, and if you're critical, you'll be cut off, your units will be zero, and you'll be forced on begging for your food and shelter and so forth. It's a very grim picture. It's a bad thing to think about. Nobody wants to do that. But getting back to a theme earlier, this is one of the reasons our leaders are letting us down, is they're not speaking the truth. They're not telling us that this is where we're headed. They're saying, well, I guess we're headed that way. The people are too damn dumb to do anything about it, so we're going that way, and at least I want to be pretty high up the scale when it happens. This is the kind of talk we're not hearing out of Washington. But anyway, you asked me the question, not our great, glorious leaders in Washington, and that is my very unhappy answer.
Could we have a war to upset the apple cart? I mean, Warren Pollack says, hey, the big problem is going to be with China, not with Russia. Although there's plenty of news with the European Union, last week freezing Russian assets. A couple of countries, Belgium, one of them, freezing Russian assets. I mean, it just doesn't look like there's a lot of war tension in the world. ISIS, South China Sea, Middle East. Ukraine, Russia's upset with now Europe. I'm sure they're upset with the U.S. War tensions. What do you think about the possibility of geopolitical risk of war, global war?
Well, I think that the risk of real hot war is relatively small. And I didn't say zero because those things can happen. You get megalomaniacs in charge of very powerful weapons and big armies. Anything could happen. But I look at war today as it has been viewed for the last century at least. It's primarily a psychological weapon. It's the threat of war, the fear of war, that is more useful to governments than actual war. Machiavelli told us that years ago, that the best way to keep people content and overlook the miseries that they have to suffer under their own governments. The best way, Machiavelli told the prince, is to embroil the people in wars or rumors of wars, so that they would be, so afraid of an enemy that they would tolerate any insult to their liberties as a means of preventing this thing they dread so much. Well, that is certainly the prime operative today. That's the prime directive today at all governments. They love to keep their people, in a state of fear. This is the interesting thing about it. Most governments today look at their own populations as the enemy, not the populations of other countries. They consider their own populations to be the group that must be controlled and dominated to sustain their power. And they know, and all of them must know, that if they ever got into a shooting war, the whole game changes, and they probably will not be there very long either. The only way to sustain this thing right now, as it's going, which is very much to the benefit of the leaders of these major nations, the only way to keep that sustained is to keep the system intact. And the way to keep it intact without their own people rebelling is to keep them in a state of constant fear of war, but to get them actually into a full state of war is not so hot, and they must know that. So that's why I say that I don't think that the chances of an all-out war are as big as, fortunately, by the way, I'm glad to be able to say that, because an all-out war probably would be even worse than the psychological war that we're in, because it would, from that point, there would be, I don't see any way to return for many, at least several generations to recover. So anyway, the short answer to your question is I think that we are in a real war. It's not necessarily a shooting war on the international scale, but there are plenty of people being killed every day in warfare around the world. I suppose if we looked at the numbers, the number of people involved in a shooting war in the Middle East and in little wars around the world, add all of that up, it's probably as big or bigger than the number of people that were involved in either of the world wars. So it's one of those things. How do you define war? We're in a war now, and but it's not that big atomic mushroom that we all think about in terms of international war. It could get to be there, but I think right now the war is primarily psychological.
Just like it was predicted in the Bible, wars and rumors of wars.
The rumors of war and the fear of war are really more powerful, more useful to the politicians of today than an actual war.
As a control mechanism.
As a control mechanism, yes.
The Greek, I just want to bring up the Greek situation. That looks terrible. It looks like neither side is got a workable plan. It looks like that could be one of the many things that could start the ball rolling into a pretty negative territory. A lot of folks think that this fall is going to be a real dicey time. I had Jonathan Kahn on. This is from the theological standpoint. He says, well, this is the end of the Super Shemitah, which is, 7 Shemitahs, cycles, and also Yule, 29, which is the worst stock market drop ever. Other people say the math is terrible, that this has been going on a lot longer than what it should have. It should have blown up in 2008, but they put it off. What do you think about a big major turn happening, this fall in the September-October time frame?
Well, it's kind of a repeat of my answer to an earlier question, Greg. I'm very bad at timing. I've been hearing predictions like this for a long time, that there's some kind of a big crevice is going to open up, and economically California and the rest of the world is going to fall into the sea in October or maybe September or maybe February. These dates come and they go. I suppose one of these days, one of those predictions is going to be true. I do not scoff at that. I do not say it's not going to happen. I just don't know why it should be any particular predicted date unless there's a decision made at the highest councils that this is the day that we, meaning they, the powers that be, that we choose to pull the plug because we have what comes next firmly in place and we're ready to execute that. Now, that is a condition under which I think there could be a specific date, or at least a narrow time frame. But I'm not aware of any such decision like that right now.
But you think it'll come from that they'll stop it abruptly. I guess that would make sense because they wouldn't want somebody front-running that trade. They want to stop it so they get the maximum. They would do that to get the maximum impact from, okay, we're going to do it now, and nobody can get on the right side of the trade. Nobody can get on. That'd be it, and nobody could take a month or two to protect them. They want this to have the maximum effect. Is that right?
I believe that that's true. If you or I were in a position of making decisions, if we were calling the shots on this and had the power to do that, as indeed some people do, in sitting in the the central banks of the world, the Federal Reserve and their equivalents in other nations, they do have that power to call the shot. They could do things with the credit system to put a tremendous strain on it at a certain point and trigger it. So if we were in a position to do that for our own gain, and we had the mindset that these people do, yeah, that's what we would do. We would say, okay, this thing is coming apart, Captain, and we can't keep her together much longer. So let's abandon ship and get on another ship, and we're going to do it tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And I think that's probably what goes on in those councils, that kind of discussion.
You think when they do it, somebody will actually just pull the plug? Not, oops, oh, surprise. You think it'll be, okay, this has gone on to where we're going to have to just stop it. That's how you think it'll come down.
I do think that, and it could get away from them. They could be surprised, but they're pretty smart people, and they're very sophisticated. They monitor all of the seismographs, economic seismographs. They monitor those very carefully, and so they know when the strains are reaching a breaking point. And so I think when you say pull the plug, the question is, well, how would they pull the plug? It could be something as simple as making an announcement into the media to cause some kind of public panic, and then just step back and let it happen. It could be something that's simple. It could be something like increasing interest rates abruptly and steeply, which would send a shudder through the markets. It could be a combination of certain things. It could be a regional war coupled on top of all of these things. Who knows? It would be easy, I think, to trigger. The hard part is to keep it from happening. It's if you just stopped manipulating the markets, stopped supporting the stock market, for example, through the plunge protection team, which they, daily they manipulate the stock market to keep the price going up, to keep the public very happy with the myth that the economy is sound because the stock market is up. If they just stopped doing that, probably for 48 hours, it would the market would really take a huge plunge. And that alone might be what they do to pull the plug, as you say. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they have different ways.
But you think that if there's something abrupt that happens, it'll be something that they have done intentionally. It won't really get away. They'll monitor it enough to know, okay, this is it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop it. We're going to call BS on the BS Tuesday. in September or whatever, right? I mean, that's what you think is the likely scenario, that when it happens, it will be a forced event.
I think I believe that these people are not stupid, and that's exactly what they would do to their advantage. Because otherwise, if they just sit back and let things happen, then they're not in control anymore, and they won't maximize their personal advantage.
The powers that be will trigger the climax. Is that a correct statement? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that's likely. I think that's more logical. And when you say force it or trigger it, it may be just by not doing something that they had been doing. But it turns out to be a trigger. It could be a negative trigger. Just, if you have the patient on life support and you pull the tube out of his nose, well, you just stop feeding oxygen to him, and did you trigger his demise? Well, you could argue that, yes.
So I saved the best for last, and that is one of the things that when I ask you at the beginning of the interview, this is off camera, what are you working on, what's your favorite things? Solutions. We've got solutions, and you talked about this website, wp.freedomforceinternational.org. wp.freedomforceinternational.org. I'll put this on after the interview section. Just if you could give us the thumbnail on what are the solutions? I mean, what are you working on? And, to spend a couple of minutes and just tell us what the solutions are if we ended on at least some sort of a positive note.
Well, but that's my favorite topic, Greg, because we can talk all day about this problem and that problem, and we're right in 99% of the cases that we're right on target. And it's so discouraging that many people throw up their hands in despair and say, well, it's all over. Nothing I can do about it. Well, it's not true. There's plenty we can do about it. Now, I don't think we could avert most of the trouble that's coming. I mean, we're heading into the rapids. I used that analogy a moment ago. We're heading into the rapids. We're already in them, and they're going to get worse. But that doesn't mean we have to get scuttled on a rock. We don't have to get splintered. Our canoe doesn't have to be thrown apart. We don't have to drown. We can come out of this as long as we're aware of really the straits that we're in. So the question is, what can we do? And that question has always been uppermost in my mind when I look at these issues. What can we do? And I have to say that until about 12 years ago, I really didn't have an answer to that. I remember as a young guy, I walk around and talk to people about this, and I've written some books in my early days and gave speeches on it. And my solution is what you normally hear today is, all right, well, be informed, read another book, attend another lecture, get involved, write to your congressman, and be a good citizen, that kind of stuff. And then it gnawed on me that this really wasn't going to work, because you write to your congressman, these are the guys that are doing us in. They serve other masters. They don't care about it. They don't care how many letters we write to them. All they care about is who writes the checks to them in most cases. So I should have been saying, write a check to your congressman and make it big, and then we can talk about solutions. Well, we don't have that kind of financial power. So what solution is there? And so that's when I came up with what I considered to be the answer. And frankly, Greg, I took the idea directly from the people who are destroying the world. They had a plan to take over. They came to power. How did they do that? A very small group of people, far less than 1% of the population, really run the world. Well, you can say, well, they got the money. Well, how did they get the money? How did they run the world with the money? And the truth is, when you analyze this, the ruling elite of today run the world because they control what sociologists call the power centers of society. Those are the groups and organizations that people belong to. These groups have leaders, and those leaders really determine public opinion on public policy, and they determine how the nation will go. What are these power centers? Those are the obvious organizations of influence, like political parties, for example. Think of the power that is in the hands of a little group at the top of our two major political parties. It's a small board of directors. It's a small group of people that select the candidates that we fight over who we're going to vote for. Who we vote for was not selected by us or delegates to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. These candidates are selected by a group, another power center called the Council on Foreign Relations. It's a little group of 4,000 people that literally, well, some people call it correctly, I think they call it the hidden government of the United States. That is a power center. Labor unions are power centers. Church organizations. These kinds of groups are important. Educational institutions, terribly important. Media centers, very, very important. Add all of those together, all of these government agencies that we call power centers, and you look at the leadership of these organizations, the people at the very top. The members of the Council on Foreign Relations are in all of them. 4,000 people are in all of the major power centers of America, and that is how such a small number can literally control and lead, influence the political thinking and the political destiny of all the rest of the nation. Now, once I got a handle on that's how they did it, and they have written books on how to do this, by the way, and they talk about it, and they publish papers on it, they talk about it in conferences. Once I actually realized that this is how it's done, I thought, well, heck, we don't have to be like them. We don't have to buy into their ideology or their lack of ethics, but we can certainly use their organizing strategies to our advantage and counter them. And once I got that idea firmly in mind, I decided to create an organization that you mentioned called Freedom Force International. And the whole purpose of this organization, we now have members in about 65 different countries. So you see, this is a worldwide problem. Same strategies going on all around the world. Once these people came together and got very clear on the strategy, once they all knew what they believed in, it's easy to know what you don't like. Yeah, I don't like this guy, he's a tyrant, but how many people can come up and say, well, this is what we should be doing? How many people can do more than just say, follow the Constitution? They don't have no idea what that means. Follow the Constitution, that's their level of understanding. Well, why? What is there about the Constitution that makes it so hot? Well, I don't know. It's because the good guys wrote it, and because it worked. Well, yeah, that's not good enough. We have to know why it worked and what parts of it maybe didn't work too well so that we can consider it as the beta model. Now we have a chance to build an improvement upon those concepts. And so we have what we call as the creed of freedom. It's what we believe in. These are the principles that all systems should be based upon. So we've got a creed, we know what we believe in, we have a strategy of how to implement that convert it into public policy, and now we're getting members to do it, to help each other from all around the world, and we're on the road. We're finally on the road to a solution to this problem.
Well, you can, I'm sure, read more about it on your website, and I'll put it on at the end of the thing. It's freedomforce.org. Let me get it right here so I get it correct here. wp.freedomforceinternational.org. wp.freedomforceinternational.org. I'll have a link at the bottom of it. And I really appreciate you coming on today. I hope you come back. We'll have you on for other pointed discussions about some of the events that are going to be unfolding, and we would like to get you back on. After all this time, I've had so many people ask to have you on. Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to being on your program again.